Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Lunch with Tech Leaders. My name is Adam Oberhausen. I'm the Vice President of Customer Solutions with Right Brain Networks, and I'm your host for today. Joining me today is software and data consultant Tom Kowalski. Say hi, Tom.
Hello.
And of course, last but not least, my good friend and comrade, business technology consultant Joe Coleman.
Hey there, Adam. Thank you for the intro there. As always, folks, you guys have any questions listening in, throw it right there in the chat, and I'll be sure to make sure it gets covered throughout the discussion here. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. In this episode, we're going to discuss a product development methodology known as ShapeUp. We're going to touch on its origins. We're going to discuss the shortcomings of some traditional methodologies. Then we're going to pivot to the core principles of ShapeUp and take a deeper dive into how the ShapeUp process works. First, I'll kick it over to Tom to introduce our subject matter expert and active practicer of ShapeUp.
Yeah, I'm interested in these things, organizational, and practice Agile, Waterfall back in the day, and Scrum and all that. So yeah, I'm excited to learn more about ShapeUp, and that's why I brought Lance back.
Friend of the show, about it?
Yes, because he practices it in his job daily. So yeah, we can learn about it from an expert practitioner.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to start with a little background on ShapeUp. Lance, I'll lean on you if you want to kick off the conversation, but when I understand, it was developed by a firm called 37 Signals, which was founded back in 99. There's a guy there named Ryan Singer who is kind of the mastermind of ShapeUp. Do you wanna talk about it, or would you like me to just recap my notes here?
Yeah, you can recap your notes. I don't know much about Ryan's background that much, but I do know that he created it, and I did look at our notes before to see that I guess he has a pretty prolific history that I don't know about. So if you want,
sure, yeah, happy to educate you.
Sure.
So 37 Signals sounds like they're a software dev shop. They started in the late 90s. Around 2004 is when they launched their Basecamp product, which is like their only product this day. Like they dropped the 37 Signals and became Basecamp, from what I understand. But that wasn't until 2014 when they decided to solely concentrate on Basecamp.
Don't they also do Hey, right? The email service as well. I feel like that's, I just know this right from the DHH. Right? He goes by, yeah. There's a lot of talk right now in the circles of cloud, right? Because they ditched AWS. I think we've talked about it, right? And how they, his little write-up on that, so.
Yeah, so Basecamp was basically an internal tool they developed for project management. Then it became its own software thing, and now it's a very popular tool that a lot of teams are using. And through Basecamp, they developed this process that they call ShapeUp. And this was mostly done by Ryan Singer, who played a pivotal role in the 37 Signals. He's the head of product strategy at Basecamp. Basically, he's been involved with the design strategy and implementation of all their products over the years. In terms of what is his impact on product development world is ShapeUp, which we're here to talk about today. He basically challenged a lot of the traditional beliefs, not just with Waterfall, but even Agile and Scrum, which I think is very exciting because I've, been doing Agile Scrum for a long time, and I wouldn't say I dislike it, but I also think it's not perfect. And so I think it's great that there's another alternative out there, and I hope there's more that come. So that's really it. Ryan does a lot in the community, does a lot of workshop and talk. His design philosophy, Ryan Singer, leans towards simplicity, clarity, and focus. Those are kind of like the three key phrases he uses a lot in his content. Really just encourages designers and developers to think critically about their choices and prioritize meaningful functionality over superficial additions, which I think we all can applaud to, because feature bloat is one of the worst things that can happen to software. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, specifically you have to know your customer too, because feature bloat is only real in the sense that, like, it's the context, right? It's like, if you're not kind of custom wrapping the functionality around the customer of your product, then that's how you end up having all this feature bloat. You're just like, your context is, I'm going to develop all these features for everybody, as opposed to, okay, I know who I'm talking to, a human being, and I'm asking them for feedback, and this is what they said. It's not always, you don't always want to listen to the individual, but sometimes that feedback that they give is pretty critical and will propel your product to the next level because a bunch of other people, hundreds or thousands of other people also want that same feature. But the key is just listening to the people that you're building products for. And ultimately, ShapeUp is a way of doing that. So Agile was too, but there were a lot of problems with the way that Agile and Scrum kind of were implemented in large organizations because of this mentality of the sprint. And if you're sprinting all the time, every 2 weeks, it can really drain your team. And it is really hard to develop and have your developers be creative, designers, developers be creative on features when they only have 2 weeks to implement something. And then suddenly the stakeholders decide, oh, we need to shift gears all of a sudden. And it can be a real knee-jerk reaction to things. So that was one of the, if anything, like the one big thing that ShapeUp promotes is stop having these 2-week cycles. It's Agile can also be that, right? You can have an Agile system where you just increase the length of the cycles to 2 months. And that's a big part of ShapeUp is you have, instead of every 2 weeks, having the business stakeholders meet and talk about the iteration and what we're going to do next. And then, you're sort of pivoting along, which can make sense in certain circumstances. If you're a startup, I don't think large businesses necessarily, unless they're building a new product, like in the very beginning, maybe it could make sense to spend the first 3 months on a 2-week interval because you're really getting that quick feedback from the customer and trying to get something, you're trying to find that product market value. But once you found it, let's switch to something longer. 2 months, every 2 months, you get, as business stakeholders, you get 6 times during the year where your decisions matter as opposed to your, micro decisions. But then you really get to think about them. By making less decisions, you really are thinking hard about, are these the most important things that need to be implemented?
Yeah.
So
maybe we should go back and
let's take a step back. What is ShapeUp, right? We kind of talked about the origin, right? Ryan a bit, but what is ShapeUp, right? Like, how does it differ from Agile?
Well, okay, so I'll rattle off the core principles. And then I'll let Lance riff on it. But basically, core principles of ShapeUp: fixed time, variable scope. So you work in fixed cycles. Default is a 6-week cycle with a determined end date, but flexibility in scope. Next core principle is the shaping of work.
Sorry, 2-week cooldown too. That's
and then a 2-week cooldown period after the 6 weeks. Next core principle is the shaping of the work. The senior team defines the rough solutions to problems, but leaves room for teams to figure out all the details. Next core principle is it's called betting instead of planning. Deciding on which projects get the green light for the cycles without making promises for the future. That's when Lance was kind of talking about the stakeholders getting to decide 6 times a year what the delivery team would focus on. So
so it breaks down 2 months, right? 6 times a year, and makes sense.
Within there's all these, beyond that, you get into the process, which we'll cover, but anything on the core principles that you think needs to be called out or built in, Lance?
That's the basic, that's the high level thing. So you can obviously take any, the ShapeUp process is this, and then it has a bunch of other stuff you included in there, and like, how you can build teams together with a designer and programmer pair. It gets really specific about how you can design your product and tools that they've had. Basecamp has had success with designing their products that you can also adopt. But, with all of these things, I think it's interesting to read ShapeUp and then adopt the parts that you like into your team that you think makes sense. You don't have to, like Scrum, you don't have to try Scrum, fail at it for whatever reason, and then hire a consultant because you didn't follow Scrum to the letter, right? And that's the reason you failed. I don't think that's, I think, try it with your team, see what things you resonate with, and then if it didn't work, kind of assess why. But, for us, ShapeUp has worked really well because we were on that 2-week cycle. And it was actually, not only was it a pain in the butt for the developers, or maybe even not so much a pain in the butt for the developers, because they're still kind of, they're in this time box 2-week thing to like deliver something. That's fine. But on the stakeholder side, we were every 2 weeks coming in and making decisions, and people get really fired up on the core team about like, what is the core principle of what we're trying to accomplish, and we're doing this every 2 weeks, and it is actually for the business stakeholders can be, it's just a lot of emotion attached to something that maybe we should just breathe a little bit and let things happen in a longer period of time and let developers be creative. And then we can reserve, and then we can also, what's also nice is that period of time is enough time to start planning out the next cycle and start to think about, these are really the most important things that we're going to be locking down what the developers can focus on for the next 2 months. And
so I think you touched on a lot of the shortcomings of why your team gravitated towards Shape Up, and I want to rattle off the shortcomings of Agile, and then maybe we dive deeper into the Shape Up process to answer some of these questions about how it actually works. But with traditional Agile Scrum, there's over planning. Arguably, you're over planning, detailed planning for long periods. Conditions change rapidly. Doesn't always align. There's fixed scopes, so teams feel the pressure to always include all the specified features, regardless of how things might be changing in a dynamic environment. Too many meetings, right? We all get stand-ups, plannings, retros, scoping, grooming. Like it's endless. The burden of backlogs, which I can't wait to talk about this, because in true Shape Up, there is no backlog.
Yep.
The short iterations, which I think, Lance, you've hammered a few times now, just that 2 week of mentality of you're always sprinting, is just unsustainable. Lack of flexibility, the overemphasis on estimations in Scrum, I think is just like, I'm going to do a future episode on estimations, because I think that's just like a huge Achilles heel of any delivery team.
Yeah.
Those are the shortcomings.
I really love time boxing, it's like, and what's interesting about the Shape Up process is that the responsibility of whether or not something got done within that time box is in the Shape Up process is not just a developer problem. It's also a business stakeholder problem. Did you define the problem and the solution well enough prior to the developer working on it? And did you understand the scope of that work within that period of time? Did you uncover all of the things, the rabbit holes that could happen that could make this even longer? It's a partnership.
Yeah. And the 6 week cycle is enough. The way I read the book, and it's basically 6 weeks seems to be the sweet spot where it feels urgent enough. Like there's urgency to get this done in 6 weeks, but it's also not like crunch mode, right? Like there's enough room there so that month and a half, it feels like you have just enough time to like take your time and be thoughtful. But also it's time boxed enough where there's that you need that pressure to complete. So diving into the process here, the first step in the process is the shaping. We touched on it. It's the steps and criteria for shaping the projects. Since you live it, Lance, I'll let you describe how your organization does shaping.
Yeah. I mean, it usually happens towards the end of the cycle, and then it bleeds into cool down a little bit. But the business stakeholders will, over the 6 week period of time, you inevitably as a business, you collect feedback from customers, from your customers and maybe their customers. But anyway, you get a lot of feedback about what's going on and what you think is going to be priority. And so as business stakeholders, you're always talking asynchronously with each other about, what potential pitches are going to land. And then what we do is during cool down, that's the bedding table period, which maybe you can discuss what bedding table is in a minute. Leading up to bedding table, that's when we're shaping up these pitches, they're called.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and sometimes that involves a developer, sometimes that involves a designer. It can involve a lot of people at the company, but it's more like asynchronous communication, where it's like when needed to get this pitch ready for bedding table, we will pull in the necessary people that have the necessary information to help complete this pitch and make sure that by the time it is scheduled for the developer to develop, there is enough scope and there is enough description about the problem, the solution, etc. The whole pitch is in a great form for that developer to be able to succeed in that 6 weeks in producing that work.
Well said. So with your team practicing Shape Up, do you actually, when you're doing the shaping process, do you actually define some boundaries that are set for setting boundaries and doing the wireframes which are fat marker sketches and breadboarding. Is that part of your guys' process that we want to touch on?
We don't do enough breadboarding. I wish we did. We don't have enough designers on our team. That is definitely a lack of resources situation with our team. So
Sure.
that being said, you can do this process without having enough designers on your team, and you don't need to necessarily have the breadboarding. But it does help. It really does help the developer when they do get a breadboard, and some sort of like sketch. And we try to provide that as much as possible when we can. But
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me give some quick definitions. So setting boundaries ensures that the team doesn't wander off track and waste time on things that don't align with the project's main objective. Wireframes, low fidelity. Rabbit holes, there you go, that's a good one. Wireframes are low fidelity representation of each page's structure. The fat marker sketches are extremely simplified drawings using a thick marker to represent UI elements. So you're not giving your front end team every little detail, kind of give them the broad strokes, right? And then breadboarding, representing the components of a page and their interactions without a visual design. So I don't know if I've ever actually even seen a breadboard, or maybe it's just like a flow chart, or I'm not sure, but it's a new term to me. So, and then that leads us into the bedding table. So Tom, if you got any questions on the shaping process, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, what's like an example of like a feature project, right, that you would shape up, right? Like what's a concrete, like, we're talking theory, like, but what's something, that you've done, right? Like paint me a picture of like what you've used it for, or like
A pitch you would call it.
yeah, I mean, there's small and large versions of it. That's actually, we kind of work backwards a lot of times where we think about things in weeks. So, maybe a small customer requirement comes in and we're just like, oh, that probably will only take a week. Let's make a pitch for that potentially, and we'll make it better in the future. And then we make it better by the time it hits bedding table. So some of these pitches are only a week long. For the bigger stuff, let's say we wanted to implement some recurring payments feature on our, because we do payment portals. We need to add some. It's something that's bigger, chunkier. Will take 6 weeks to do. Then we'll say, okay, this thing will probably take 6 weeks. And then what we do is, working backwards from what we want to accomplish, we start killing the scope, and we're just like, okay, now we've got a pitch we think will actually fit 6 weeks. Talk to the developer, our lead developer. We talk to potential developers that we think are going to work on this pitch, and we get it down to, okay, this makes sense. This is probably going to be 6 weeks, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Moving along, we go into the bedding table, which is how stakeholders decide on what gets built. So the bedding process replaces traditional roadmaps and planning. It's a process where the stakeholders place bets on projects they believe should be pursued next. And I will hand the baton to Lance to talk about how this works in practice.
Yeah, you gotta get your chips out. Gotta get the background chip noise. No, it's fun. It's a fun process. What we typically do is, maybe this, because we're such a small team, we can do this, but there are to save time. What we do is we take all the pitches that we've built over the period of time, and this isn't how ShapeUp does it, but we've optimized it so that we kind of throw all of our pitches into, based on their time. We have 3 teams. So sorry, I'll go back. We have 3 teams that we allocate work to, and each team can take on 6 weeks worth of work. And so what we do is we just throw all the pitches into the teams, kind of not haphazardly. We kind of have an idea of what we think that certain teams are going to be able to handle, and we throw the top, just the random ones in there until it fills up. And then from there, we start betting on, okay, the stuff that's not in that cycle right now, do we think it's going to, is higher or lower priority than the things that exist in there already? And then if we think it's higher, we then move it around and adjust things. That's how we do it. That's not how the ShapeUp process is on paper, how they do it. They go every pitch, and everything has to fight for its life, kind of thing. But by the time you hit the bedding table, you really have to be prepared with all the stuff you think you're going to want, because if you're not, sometimes you're in the very beginning, we actually had to redo the bedding table, and it's not fun doing that. So
the formal betting process, which I think you guys are, doing a close, you're aligned with the process, but it says here, you start with the pitch. The shared projects are presented to stakeholders. Then you get into the evaluation. Projects are assessed based on potential impact, feasibility, and alignment with company goals, and then decision. Stakeholders decide on which projects move forward in the next cycle. And so it sounds like you can actually have multiple pitches into one cycle because, like you said, a pitch might only take 3 days. So it could be like a change to an existing system, or even a bug fix could be a pitch. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So the benefits are that it keeps the focus on the high priority projects and allows for flexibility in the changing business environment, which, arguably Scrum allows that too. I guess it depends on how strict teams are with their roadmaps. And, I've seen teams try to do a roadmap for, a year out. And usually anything past 90 days is just pie in the sky.
What I've felt with Kanban, I really liked the idea, but as I've kind of thought about it more and witnessed different teams using it, one issue that you have is like, you have this backlog of things that are on the most important thing that the business considers need to be accomplished, and you're supposed to just pull from the top. But the problems are, how do you know that the person that now has available allocation of work is going to be the best person to do that work? And then it can feel like, what am I really supposed to do? Like, a business stakeholder didn't say, I explicitly should be doing this and expect you to do this. So you're kind of just like, it's this weird, like, I don't know if the time that I'm spending right now is what I should be spending time on. Like, and so there's a lot of communication issues with, I didn't get assigned this. Am I qualified to do this, et cetera.
I think a lot of backlogs, a lot of items in backlogs are just tickets created by the team itself. And the stakeholders have no idea. All they see is a backlog, which is a black hole of endless work. So question though, Lance, you've got all these pitches prepared for the betting table. If a pitch doesn't make the cut, does it go to a backlog for the next cycle to be considered?
So we do keep a pitch graveyard.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the next betting table, if you're going to repitch something, you have to make it good. You have to redo it. You have to make sure that this is going to win this time, right? So it's there, but it's only, you have to repitch it if it's going to make it. And for whatever reason, it didn't make it this cycle, maybe because it wasn't ready. You didn't do a good enough job articulating its importance, the scope, whatever it is, didn't make it. So yes, we do keep a backlog, pitch graveyard, but those have to be repitched every time if you actually want to think about it and do it in that cycle.
How does it work with the coordination of the teams, right? Because we actually did it 1 week sprints. The last team that I was working on, that we did a Scrum process, and it allowed us to, set expectations for other teams. Like, this will be done this week, this will be done this week. You can start working on this and use that, right? The different systems, coordinating. Going 6 weeks seems like, or 2 months, right? It seems like you're really drawing that out. So how does that work with coordinating? Like, this API has to be done on this system in order for this team to work on that. How does that work out?
Well, every time we finish the betting table, we then take that betting table and I take the entire cycle that we've planned out, and I send an email to the entire team. So that's the expectation setting. Like, these are the things that we as a team have decided need to be accomplished in the next 2 months. So that goes out. Everyone's pretty clear on that. And then once that happens, the first week or so, teams are meeting, people are meeting and looking at their pitches and discussing them. And they're sort of doing a discovery about like who I need to talk to, and do I need to get more detail on this process? So that's when they're really starting to like go and talk to other people and figure out how they're going to get this done.
So are there dependencies within teams like during that 2-month cycle, or is it like, hey, this, you got to wait. If you're waiting for something to be done, from another team, you got to pitch that for the next 2-month cycle. Is that how that works?
Example, Lance, the back-end team needs to get an endpoint stood up for the front-end team to complete the work. So do you have to like lay it out, be like sequentially to say the back-end team needs to deliver this in the first week of the shape up, or of the cycle, so that then the front end team can actually get what they need to start doing on week 2 of the cycle? Do you have to get that granular? Is that kind of what you're asking, Tom?
Yeah, I get it. So we try our best to make things not dependent on other teams, but if they do, we do sort the pitches. So if there's like smaller pitches within that cycle for a team, we do sort it by what we feel the priority is. But so like, let's say you did have a team that was working on something that was dependent on another team. You could set it up where maybe, let's say you had 2 pitches for that team. The first 3 weeks, they're doing something that doesn't depend on any other team to get what they need to accomplish. Then the second pitch, maybe it does depend on another team. And, by the time they're done with those 3 weeks, hopefully that other team has finished the thing that they were depending on. So you can it's the business stakeholders that are having to be mindful about the dependencies and plan it for people.
Want to be respectful of our time here. We have a few more sections of the process that we should cover, which
Sure.
is the building phase, the 6-week cycle, and the 2-week cool downs. I've touched on them a little bit, Lance, if you want to recap and just kind of talk about how the actual building process goes. I think we just did, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's much to touch on there.
Well, I mean, and what's really nice is you trust your team to accomplish it. They have more autonomy, and it's like giving someone a nice long project to just like, okay, let's just figure this out and get creative. So that's what I really like about it. It's a lot less stress to deliver everything in 6 weeks than it is at different times, as opposed to every 2 weeks. So if you could have like 6 1.1 week pitches, right? But like a couple of those pitches you might accomplish really fast in the beginning, and then the last few it takes a while.
Yeah.
Or the opposite could be true.
And then talk about 2-week cool down. In my notes, it says a break after cycle used for retrospection, addressing bugs, and prepping for the next cycle. I mean, are your developers just like, sitting around playing Xbox for those 2 weeks, or what are they doing?
It helps down. No, we try in the beginning. We did have a lot of periods of time where there would be some bleed over, and you have to kind of as a team get better at that. So yes, in the beginning you'll probably find that your first few cooldowns you may have some bleed into there from the cycle. So in the cooldown you can also include stuff like, okay, I've deployed and finished things, but I want to go back and refactor things and make things better, the code look nicer, maybe write a few more tests. So that could be in your cooldown. Bug fixes.
I like that.
Yeah, and then bug fixes are like, maybe even bug fixes that were in a previous cycle come up, like maybe, and you didn't kind of prioritize them, but now you can start addressing those if the company deems them a priority. But we do try to, like, obviously as an organization, make it so these bugs aren't popping up every cooldown. Yeah, sometimes the developers, if there's enough time, they can work on open source projects or whatever it is. It's still work that they're doing, but it's not. You need some sort of reset after a large project, and that's another big reason why sprints can be hard, because you never get a break ever.
Can you talk a little bit about how ShapeUp deals with risks and unknowns? And like in particular, I'm curious about scenarios where I'm sure it's had to have happened where you kind of get into a pitch, you get into a building phase, and the dev team realizes like, sorry, stakeholders, but this thing was not scoped properly at all, and this is a train wreck. So can you talk about how you deal with some of those challenges that might come up?
So that is, to me, a failure of the business stakeholders getting that pitch ready, because, and obviously there are certain things that do come up sometimes. There is a section for R&D. So you can also have an R&D phase. If the thing that you're wanting to work on there's so many rabbit holes you don't know about, well, maybe you should schedule an R&D pitch where it's like, you know what, for 2 weeks or 6 weeks, I want you to dedicate all of that time to just figuring out what these rabbit holes are. So you're scheduling time to like figure out more information about this to reduce the risk when you actually start to implement. This can be tough for business stakeholders because you're always just like, no, I need this done. But if you do that, just as a business stakeholder, you have to keep in mind that, okay, you may fail this pitch, right? And if you do, well, you may have, if it's so important, then you may have to repitch this and kind of zombie the existing feature. But like, that's just not really in the spirit of wanting to, like, you really should be deploying something after 6 weeks. With those 1 week pitches, you actually should be deploying those every single time too. So it's like if you had 6 1 week pitches, like deploy every week.
Yeah.
Deploying, the more that you leave this thing isn't deployed, that is, it gets worse and worse, right? Because you don't get that customer feedback. So what we like to do is we like to make sure that, okay, fine, there was an unknown that was found and that did delay things, but let's figure out a way to like cut scope and deploy this thing at the end of that period. And then we can make another pitch later if we really need that extra functionality we killed.
Does your team use Basecamp to manage the shape up process?
No.
Okay.
We used something called Clubhouse.
Okay.
But that kind of came from the Kanban thing that I was obsessed with before and have since learned from. But it really works well for moving cards around, and so we really advanced at using it. So we can do the betting table really easily in it because we just move cards around, and then once those are done, we create epics, and then we put stories underneath, and then those are the pitches.
Is this something that has to be adopted, across the entire organization, or could this be like a team specific type of process? Because the last organization, it would kind of had the different processes work for different teams. So is this kind of like an all or nothing for the org, or do you think it could work like per team, one's an Agile, one's in Shape Up?
It's a good question. I think you could mix and match. It's really up to the business stakeholders and the developers willing to try something new. It's funny, I've actually heard some pushback from some teams. A friend of mine, where their company is doing Shape Up, and his initial reaction was no. And I'm like, actually, you just try it out, and you'll actually be less stressed out about the process, and you'll be more creative. Just go through a cycle and see how it feels. And he was, I think he's reporting good results now, but he was worried because one company before that, I think, tried Shape Up and it was disastrous. And I think it's just, you also have to keep in mind the context of Basecamp and sort of their work culture and remote life and not putting so much pressure on everyone to sprint all the time. So if your business really is incompatible with that culture, maybe Shape Up is not for you. I don't know.
Do you think Shape Up scales? Like, do you think it can work in huge dev shops or, product management?
Good question. I mean, I think Basecamp has 150 developers or employees, and so I mean, and each team is only 2 people. So if you think about it that way, you can scale big time. If you have, let's say, if you get 60 teams, but your business stakeholders are just associating work to those 60 teams, but they get to decide, okay, these are let's say 120, so 60 teams. I mean, you're making a decision every 2 months for 60 teams about what's the most important. I think it can scale. I don't know if there's an upper limit because, obviously you're creating that. You're going to have a long meeting if you have to plan 6 weeks worth of work, but yeah.
Does everyone get on the same cadence, right? Is it like every team, like they're all starting the same day, or is it going to be staggered? Okay.
Yes.
And I recall reading in my research for the show, but I didn't put it in my notes. Is it desirable to have a 2-person team for each pitch?
That is the holy grail according to Basecamp.
Okay. I missed that. Yeah, we missed that. That's a big thing.
Well, I mean, I don't know if they've included that in the process necessarily, but they talk about it on their Rework podcast and some other places. You can have bigger teams of 5 people, whatever it is, but or maybe you have some mix-up. Typically, because we're short-staffed on the design side, we'll have one designer assigned to several teams, which isn't desirable, but that we've been able to. The amount of design work that we need as a company isn't as high as maybe some other companies, or maybe we're just not using our designer as efficient as well as we should be. Maybe that designer should be talking to customers more than we have them, right?
Yeah. So, well, this is really interesting. I think we could probably do a follow-up episode on this because I think there's more to dive into here because I've got a lot of notes that I haven't even touched on. But want to take this opportunity to thank Lance and Tom for joining me on the show here. It was really interesting. I'm excited to try Shape Up. I want to find a project that I can try it out on. I think it could, being in a consulting world and, thinking about project-based work, Shape Up could be better. It's another tool in my tool chest to try a different way to manage projects. So,
I mean, experiment with the intervals, right? Like, why it doesn't have, why you could do once a month. Like, what if you had 3 weeks work and then 1 week cool down?
Mhm.
I think that it's just the time boxing isn't something you have to be set on. Whatever works for your business, right? If you want to bill monthly, maybe it makes sense to have a monthly cadence where you have the 3 weeks and then the 1 week cool down, and then you bill the customer based on that scope of work.
Yeah, great insights as always. We'd love to have everyone join us again next week, where Ray Welker is going to continue his series on infrastructure as code, and he's going to be comparing and contrasting some of the many popular tools used in the space. So look forward to that episode, and hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and take care.
You too. Thank you.